So today's topic is rethinking Darwinism. So obviously, Charles Darwin is considered like a big guru in the whole biological world. He wrote a book called Origin of Species, and he said that basically everything started from a single celled organism and then we all branched off. Let's see if his theory is correct or not. So his theory is descent with modification. Basically, he only drew one picture, tree of life, and he said everything came from a common ancestor and minor differences in individuals would appear first, and these differences would eventually increase until one species had become two or more. Differences among species would then grow until species became so different that they would be classed as separate genera. Genera would diverge to become separate families, families would diverge to become separate orders, and so on. Eventually, differences would become so great that there had originally been one major division or phylum. Now there would be two. So one phylum would be divided into two. Phylum is just like a category. Today there are several dozen animal phyla. Phyla is plural for phylum. The major ones include nematodes, which are worms, annelids, earthworms, mollusks, clams and snails, arthropods, lobsters and insects, echinoderms, starfish and sea urchins, and chordates, fishes and mammals. So this is history of life. Everything started from one point, and suddenly, magically, man appeared like that. So monkeys became man. So this is, very debatable because how one animal is evolving into a different animal. Because today on the planet, you will see there are many, many animals coexisting. Animals, birds, plants. So the so-called evolution of Darwin is now seen as extra genetic mechanisms because he said that there are some finches on the Galapagos Islands in near the equator in Pacific Ocean, and he said that various situations like no rain, human disturbances, all of a sudden the birds' beaks would change. But what happened is the birds' beaks were not changing; they were changing back once the rain started. So it's not like a real genetic variations. So scientists are now finding extra genetic mechanisms. So his theory is not really standing up to the current scrutiny. So Darwin speculated on the tree of life, and in his notes he said, "I think." So which means he didn't really know whether his theory was right or wrong. He started at the bottom with one species and he started branching off. If these genes go away or if these characteristics go away, this becomes a different species or genera, and he started force fitting some of these different um, new animals or birds that he found. He's saying, oh, this bird evolved from this animal. For example, this animal had these wing like things, and suddenly the wings grew out and the animal became a bird, like that. So he had all these speculative things. So there is something called Cambrian explosion, geologically sudden appearance in the fossil record of most animal phyla during a span of less than 10 million years. So for long, yeah, this evolution, according to him, took long windows, but suddenly within 10 million years in the Cambrian period, like if you know a little bit of geology, there are Precambrian, Cambrian, Neanderthal, different kinds of periods in the geology of Earth. So suddenly, where did all these animals come from? So he said it's just like an explosion. Um, the extreme speed of anatomical change and adaptive radiation during this brief period requires explanation that go beyond those proposed for evolution of species within the modern biota. Is by one scientist called R.L. Carroll. So there are also other books that are kind of contesting his view. Cambrian explosion, evolution's Big Bang or Darwin's dilemma, um, and then explosion of life. All of a sudden, how can so many species come if everything is supposed to evolve one by one? How are you seeing so many fossils within the rocks when you did excavation, right? So there is a specific term for that. I'm forgetting that term, but essentially there is a term that shows how fossils can be related to what period this particular species existed. I believe it is called carbon dating and radioisotope dating. Yeah, that's what they are called. Using carbon dating and radioisotope dating, they can find out the age of these species and fossils. So most modern animal groups suddenly appeared between 540 and 520 million years ago. This is the dilemma Darwin is having. Darwin cannot explain the abrupt appearance of dozens of these groups, and this is arguably the most important event. Darwin himself famously considered that this was at odds with his normal evolutionary process. So there was no, according to him, there was a normal process. Suddenly, this Cambrian explosion where so many new species came about, and he cannot explain. The different phyla appeared, and there must have been vast periods during which the world swarmed with living creatures. In the fossil record, however, most of the major animal phyla appear fully formed in the beginning of the geological period known as Cambrian. So Cambrian explosion is real, and for some biologists, at least paradoxical and mysterious from perspective of Darwin's theory. Since the abruptness and extensiveness of Cambrian explosion are so well documented, there is no excuse for a biology textbook to deal with the animal fossil record without even mentioning it. Like, I'm sure, Chandar, when you went to your biology class, nobody talked about the Cambrian explosion, did they?
No, not that I remember.
Yeah, yeah, because they don't talk about it. It comes from a different discipline, right? It comes from geology. Geology means study of geo or earth.
Mhm.
So they
Okay.
don't they don't superpose these two theories together. They blindly say, "Oh, man came from monkey, man came from monkey." Like I was giving a class once, and in my class there was an Indian lady, middle aged, and I said, "Whoever thinks they came from a monkey, please raise your hand." And that lady raised her hand because the textbooks basically taught us that we all came from monkeys, and Darwin's theory is real. Darwin himself is saying, "I cannot explain Cambrian explosion."
So, Prabhuji, I have a question here.
Yes.
Um, when also when the research says,